The debrief room was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace but from uncertainty. A flight had returned under blackout conditions, with no telemetry, no clearance, and no explanation. The name listed on the roster wasn't in the pilot's seat. Review crews watched the footage again. The silhouette in the rear cockpit never moved, never spoke, and yet, the aircraft had landed clean. Then the base operations chief stepped forward, asked a single question, and someone finally said her name. And everything changed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. Copper Dune Air Station was already hot by 7 in the morning. The sand-colored concrete shimmered in the rising heat, and the metallic scent of jet fuel floated over the ramp like a curtain. Inside the mission prep room, the walls hummed with static and projection chatter as the morning sortie assignment scrolled across the central display. Freya stood near the rear door, unnoticed. She wore a standard-issue tactical flight suit, though her sleeves were rolled neatly and her gloves hung looped through her belt. The patch on her chest didn't match the day's manifest. It read, Raven Crew, not Raven 2. No one seemed to notice, or care. Her ash-brown hair was braided tightly down the back, a single, tidy line that brushed her collar when she turned her head. The braid, like everything else about her, went unmentioned. Cole was already holding court, the lead seat for the morning sortie. He leaned one hip against the edge of the ops table, smiling like the room owed him applause. He was loud, tan from recent desert flights, and eager to remind everyone how often he'd flown solo. A few of the younger pilots hung on his every word, laughing louder than necessary. "Looks like I've got a passenger today," Cole said, reading the roster. "Raven 2. Backseat Barbie. Hope she packed snacks." He looked up to see if Freya would react. She didn't. She simply stepped forward and tapped her badge against the scanner, confirming check-in. The screen blinked. A tech misread the display and said her name aloud. Wrong vowel, wrong emphasis. No one corrected it. She didn't either. Her helmet arrived late, rushed in by a logistics runner who seemed winded just from carrying it. The label read Fryer in block tape, black marker already smeared. She turned it slowly in her hands, then adjusted the chin strap. No comment. No pause. Her checklist was folded tight in her thigh pocket. She hadn't needed to review it. She'd memorized the whole pre-flight sequence 2 nights earlier. Alone. The lead controller read off final instructions. All F-15Es would launch in sequence, hold formation at 100.0, and switch to simulated threat overlay near Grid 5. They added, possible live test if foreign signals ping active. Maintain posture. Freya moved when called. No delay. No wasted motion. When the room emptied, she walked alone toward the hangar. A wind stirred against the open doors, rustling the edge of her flight map. She let it settle. Behind her, someone muttered. "She doesn't even look like she's in ops." "More like logistics," another voice replied. "That's the point. Keeps morale pretty." Laughter trailed behind them, brittle and lazy. She didn't turn around. The Strike Eagle loomed ahead, tail shadow stretching over the hangar floor. The panels were dull from sand abrasion, the undercarriage already warm. She approached from the rear ladder, gloves now on, steps measured and deliberate. Inside the cockpit, Cole was already adjusting his seat height. He didn't look back. "You good back there?" he called over his shoulder. Freya replied with a simple, "Yes." "Copy that. Just try not to bump the stick." She locked in her harness without replying. From the tower, a scratchy voice came through Raven 2. "Confirm airframe loaded." The next voice said, "Fryer, check your rear telemetry. We've got bleed from last sortie." She keyed the comm. Name's Freya. Rear seat green. Ready to launch. Silence followed. Then a muffled reply. "Copy. Rear green." No apology. No adjustment. She glanced over her left console, scanning gauges, toggling subsystems in order. Her fingers moved with fluid precision, each sequence clean. Her boots braced light against the floor, her breath steady. She didn't need a better helmet, or the right name on the roster, or anyone's approval. She just needed sky. Outside, the runway shimmered in the heat. Beyond it, the threat corridor pulsed faintly on the digital map. Her hands rested on either side of the console. One breath. One more. No one would see her in the recordings. The cockpit cam only faced forward. The credit would go where it always went. She didn't care. Not yet. She was flying anyway. The Strike Eagle cruised at altitude, engines steady as the desert blurred beneath them. Freya sat in the back seat, her helmet snug, her hands resting lightly on the console's edge. The sky looked clean on the surface, but the mission board had flagged unusual signals near the northern ridge. The sortie was still officially a simulation, but they were close enough to real airspace that Command had warned them to fly alert. Cole didn't seem concerned. "Nothing out here but rocks," he said, glancing at the clouds forming ahead. "Unless the clouds start jamming radar." Freya tracked the telemetry anyway. Something in the sensor feedback didn't sit right. There was a sharp dip, then a ripple one she'd only ever seen during raw signal simulations when high-altitude interference got spliced with tracking pulses. She checked again. A flicker in the data stream repeated, slightly offset. Without warning, the HUD blinked. Then the canopy lighting dropped. Systems cascaded down one by one. The comm loop popped once, then fell silent. Both flight computers flashed a failure code. The Strike Eagle tilted slightly, caught by crosswind. Cole's voice came tight. "Raven 2, we've got a blackout. Resetting primary nav." He toggled switches. Nothing responded. Freya watched him adjust the trim, but his hands were shaking now. A pulse of static echoed across the intercom. Then silence. A moment later, the aircraft dipped again. The pitch was shallow, but the reaction wasn't. Cole's breathing grew audible through the shared channel. "Losing this. Back up offline. Trying to—" His voice cut out. He slumped forward. The aircraft banked left. Freya moved without panic. Her gloved hand reached across the center console, flipped the manual override, and pulled the system reset lever with her left. It stuck for half a second unused, dusty, like most forgotten tools, and then gave. The backup feed flickered. Only partial data returned. From the tower, a clipped voice called out, "Raven 2, report status. Back seat. Confirm your position." Freya leaned into her console. The HUD was blinking in fragments, altimeter scrambled, vector line crawling in reverse. But her internal map was clearer than the screen. She recognized the cloud shadow angle. She saw the arc of the terrain they'd passed 4 minutes ago. She toggled the secondary radar gate from her panel and reprogrammed the search pattern, tracing signal logic manually. It came alive, low resolution but functional. She activated comms. "This is Raven 2. Backseat. Pilot is unresponsive. I have control." There was silence on the channel, then a stammer. "Repeat. Backseat has. Did you say control?" Freya didn't answer again. The aircraft jolted as another wind shear rocked the left wing. She compensated before it rolled. Her boot locked into the floor brace. Her braid slid across the side of her helmet, damp against her neck. She adjusted throttle by touch. The targeting system tried to reset, failed, and collapsed into standby. She switched it off. She didn't need weapons. She needed control. Over the ridge, a spiked frequency surged. Enemy radar, but faint testing, not locking. She tracked its sweep, mapped the drift zone, and angled their path to ride the blind corridor between signal peaks. Every gauge was lying, but her math held. "Raven 2, confirm if you are descending. Your altitude vector shows instability." Freya replied calmly. "Maintaining altitude. Flight stable. Continuing mission path." Command didn't respond right away. The cockpit was quieter now. The silence wasn't peace. It was weight. Cole didn't stir. His harness held him upright. Freya didn't check on him yet. Not while the jet was still climbing unevenly. She rerouted oxygen to minimum flow, lowered cabin pressure, and rebalanced vertical trim. Her eyes tracked visual markers through the scratched canopy, a horizon check without sensors. Her pulse didn't spike. Her breath stayed level. Cold air crept in at her wrists. But she didn't notice. Below them, the terrain shimmered under the thermal haze. Somewhere behind the hills, the enemy signal was still scanning. She cut just left of it. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't training. It was repetition. Simulator hours. Backseat drills. Signal logic learned in silence. Built without praise. She didn't need command to believe her. She needed the jet to obey. And it did. Freya's fingers adjusted the yaw trim by touch, eyes flicking between the broken readouts and the edge of the canopy. The horizon was barely visible, distorted by atmosphere and scratched glass. She counted seconds. 1 for the pitch, 2 for drift. Then she stabilized with 2 light taps on the console. Her body knew the balance before the instruments did. The training never came from a class. It came from the back of a hangar, at night, under low light and cold air. Her father used to mark thermal drift paths on a chalkboard salvaged from an old comms trailer. He taught her to trace signal arcs and deduce wind layers by the delay in thermal scatter. He wasn't a pilot, but he built the telemetry beds they flew with. No one ever mentioned him on the record. She rechecked cabin pressure. It had held steady for 40 seconds. Cole still hadn't moved. She remembered how she'd once been tagged for lead track. Her instructors didn't say it outright, but she'd seen her name at the top of the rotation sheet for the advanced sim cycle. 3 days later, the sheet was updated. Her name was missing. She asked no questions. The next day, she was told she'd been reassigned to back seat for flight stabilization support. Her first thought had been to argue. Instead, she downloaded every data packet used in the air control module and began recreating the telemetry arc by hand. In the cockpit now, she muted the open comm loop, silencing the feedback hiss. Cole's last words replayed faintly in the system memory. She didn't mean to hear them, but they were caught in a diagnostic buffer. "Don't worry, backseat doesn't crash the bird." The words looped once and then vanished as she toggled the system's override. She had logged over 600 sim hours after midnight, none of it credited. The base computers stored timestamps, but those records were purged every quarter. No one counted sessions that weren't scheduled. Freya counted them anyway. Not for pride, just for pattern. The signal logic in this quadrant wasn't textbook. She adjusted altitude by 4 degrees and leaned into the stick. The jet responded with a minor vibration confirmation she'd skirted the thermal curl under the ridge. Her fingers moved to a toggle switch near the lower right panel, the one she had soldered herself during avionics training 2 years earlier. It had been a test project, technically not sanctioned for use, but no one had removed it. Now it reconnected the secondary stabilizer feed to the back seat's manual control. The light blinked green. The stabilizers aligned. She exhaled. She remembered what the officer had said when she corrected a telemetry sync delay during a training review. He hadn't even looked up from his tablet. She flies like she's reading a manual, too slow to lead. She didn't answer then. Just rewired the sync algorithm and submitted it under anonymous systems feedback. A week later, it was implemented in the squadron update, labeled as a contractor adjustment. Her eyes moved across the panels again. The targeting system was still offline. That was fine. She wasn't flying to fight. She was flying to survive. Below, the sun lit the edge of the horizon in bands of amber and dust. She mapped the terrain by memory now, not by aid. The visual offset of shadow against ridge confirmed what she had calculated moments earlier. They were 30 seconds from the signal shadow zone. She angled the flight path just under it. Her breath fogged faintly in the mask. Her braids slid again across the padding behind her helmet. The checklist in her head ticked down. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She thought of the badge sewn inside her harness, hidden along the inner seam, her father's old flight patch. The stitching was worn at the edge, thread pulled at the corners. It wasn't a squadron patch or unit insignia, just a faded emblem from a joint systems test in Nevada, long before she'd ever worn a flight suit. He told her once that quiet flight was the truest kind, when the jet moved because it knew you weren't guessing. Her hands moved again. Small corrections. A 3-degree angle shift. Sunlight blinked across the edge of the canopy. Her eyes stayed forward. She didn't need proof. This was the proof. She was flying the jet, and it was listening. The jet began to hum differently as Freya dipped beneath the upper shear layer. The sound was deeper, more guttural, as if the fuselage itself had changed frequency. The HUD had died 20 minutes ago. Her altimeter spun, then froze. The navigation panel flickered once, then gave up entirely. But she didn't need it. She could feel the roll in her spine, the angle of descent in her breath. Mountain shadows moved below like fingers. The terrain wasn't visible, only the way the light cut across it, faint and orange at the tips, blue-black underneath. She rode that color shift like a rail line. The F-15E shifted weight under her hands. Every motion was deliberate. Her body stayed calm. Raven 2. Do you read? A voice said across the comm. This is base control. We're reading erratic vectoring. Possible spiral descent. Please confirm, do you copy? She did not respond. The words floated past her, barely touching. The drone cluster appeared on radar as noise first, not shape. The signal bloom looked like heat scatter, wide and diffuse. Then it contracted. 3 pings, equidistant. Then 4. Then 6. Passive surveillance drones. No weapons, but they were drifting toward her descent corridor in a slow, calculated arc. If they locked to her vector, they'd signal a perimeter breach. That would bring the live response. Freya's hand reached down to the radar circuit. She rerouted the secondary board, pushed a bypass that was never meant to be field switched. The circuit kicked, coughed, then hummed back to life. She pulled power from the auxiliary pod, just enough to pulse a decoy ping from below the ridge line. The drones responded, drifting off course. One by one, they faded from view. She hadn't fired a shot. She hadn't needed to. Inside the cockpit, the temperature dropped. One of the bleed valves was leaking. She could feel it in her joints. Her breath slowed. Oxygen dropped. 10 seconds passed before she corrected flow. No panic. Just a methodical flick of the rebalancer valve. She counted the seconds again. Her eyes didn't blur. A low static loop played across the intercom. Cole's last voice command came through as a ghost. Get out of my airframe. She muted it. The targeting reticle blinked once ghost data from a dead circuit. She let it hang there, not as a threat vector, but as a point of reference. She kept the dot level with the canopy edge, flying the shape instead of the data. Is Raven 2 responding? Another voice asked. We've got no telemetry. Possible crash descent. Advise pulling medevac. Then a different voice. Younger. Less certain. Negative. I've got eyes. She's still airborne. I can see the shadow. She's flying it. No one replied. Freya adjusted trim again. She lowered speed by feel, not by gauge. The jet trembled under her, then steadied. The left wing dipped, righted, held. Below, the ridge gave way to a flat shelf, a canyon inlet. She tilted toward it and began the descent path manually. The static map on the HUD flickered back once half a line of digital terrain. She turned it off. It was wrong. Her memory was better. She'd studied this approach for months during downtime, building mental overlays from scraps of simulation and degraded maps. Her mind held every echo line, every blind zone. She followed that internal map now, not with hope, but certainty. Wind slammed against the fuselage. The jet flexed. She rode it. A vibration shook through the seat. One strut was losing balance. The airframe protested. She tuned it out. The cockpit was dark now, except for one overhead bulb near the rear avionics board. Its glow lit the braid across her shoulder, soaked dark with sweat. Her hand rested on the stick. The other gripped the manual throttle, white-knuckled but steady. Behind her, Cole hadn't moved. His breathing was shallow but regular. He wouldn't wake until they were down. If they got down. Unknown aircraft. You're entering final descent pattern. Please confirm crew status. Freya keyed the mic. Her voice was level. Back seat active, front seat unresponsive, comm degraded, continuing descent. The line went silent. The tower controller didn't know what to do with that. She followed the contour of the canyon wall, flying inside the margin, lower than protocol allowed. Crosswind gusted again. She adjusted with her heel, left boot pressing down to realign the rudder axis. The aircraft held. The wing cam was still running. Somewhere on the ground. Someone would be watching. All they would see was the shape of the jet and the silhouette of one woman's braid in the back seat. The rest would come later. Freya looked forward, eyes on the dust line rising off the far end of the approach path. No flight lane markers, no beacon, only memory. She banked once, wide and smooth, then straightened. Somewhere in the canyon below, the sun caught a slope and bounced the light back into the canopy. It flashed once across her cheek, enough to show the tension in her jaw. She didn't flinch. She could hear the whine of the jet thinning out now, the change in air pressure, the narrow corridor of arrival. It was not a standard path. It was not cleared by anyone. She reached forward and reset the pressure altimeter just to feel it click under her glove. It wasn't connected to anything anymore, but she didn't need it to be. This was not a guess. It was not a gamble. Every line she flew now was known, internalized, final. She nudged the throttle back 1 point and let the airframe settle. She was landing this bird, and no one could stop her. The runway at Copper Dune shimmered under wind shear and late heat. Freya saw it only in slices, through a canopy fogged by pressure lag and crusted salt. The approach vector wasn't official. She hadn't received clearance. She didn't expect it. Her comms were patchy, still looping static. The tower didn't know who was at the controls, or if anyone still was. She kept the nose aligned with the top edge of the canyon rim, riding the last descent angle with surgical intent. The F-15E dropped in layers, not levels, no guidance system, no flaps deployed. She touched throttle once to bleed energy, then again to feel the jet's reply. The reply came late, but it came. Inside the control tower, 3 personnel stood over an open channel, listening to the silence. One of them asked, "Are we sure this isn't a drone?" Another shook his head. "Too precise." "That's not automation. That's a manual descent." A third leaned toward the screen and frowned. No one should be able to fly that blind. Freya didn't hear them. Her focus was full. The targeting reticle she'd repurposed as a visual marker was centered. She used it to lock the runway edge in her field of view, not to fire just to see. Her left hand adjusted altitude with pressure alone. Her right braced on the throttle. The tower's main monitor flickered. A shadow appeared on the external camera feed, sleek, fast, low, too low. The auto alert flagged it as a glide pattern below safe minimums. One of the observers said, "Unknown control. She's going to overshoot." Another voice answered flatly, "She's going to make it." Down on the field, emergency crews were already staged. No lights, no motion. Orders were to wait. It wasn't yet an authorized emergency. Freya felt the crosswind shift against the nose. She countered with the rudder. The jet answered, her jaw set. Her braid was soaked, plastered against the back of her suit. Her gloves were slick. Still, every correction was deliberate. She didn't see the base. She saw the line of light on the far horizon. She saw the shimmer in the air where heat met shadow. She trusted that. The last 100 feet came fast. The cockpit shuddered once. Her fingers found the brake lever. She didn't pull it yet. A controller finally spoke through the static. "Unidentified airframe. Divert to auxiliary strip. Repeat. Divert." Freya ignored it. She lined up by memory, not by instruction. 1 more second. Then wheels hit concrete. The impact wasn't clean, but it was controlled. The aircraft bounced once, then rolled. Her boot locked under the brace. Her back straightened. The brake lever came down. The jet slowed. The wind passed them. A soft hiss from the undercarriage followed. Then, stillness. "Inside the tower," someone whispered. Did that just come from the back seat? No answer came. Only the live wing cam kept rolling. The feed displayed a partial interior silhouette helmeted, soaked, unmoving clearly in the rear seat. The crew trucks rolled late. They reached the aircraft as Freya unlatched her harness and leaned forward. Her arms moved stiffly. Her gloves fell to the cockpit floor. She pulled herself up, one motion at a time. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at the flashing vests or the waiting command team. She turned toward Cole, reached forward, and checked his pulse. It was there, thready, but solid. A medic climbed up beside her and froze. He looked into the rear seat, registered the damp braid clinging to her collar, and blinked. "Back seat fluid in," he said, almost to himself. Freya didn't answer. She set the helmet still marked Freya onto the dash. Then she climbed out. Her boots hit the ground light, then held. The flight line went silent. One of the tower techs, still watching from above, leaned toward the mic. "She flew it," he said, voice low. "The back seat. She flew the whole thing." No one responded. Not right away. A junior pilot who'd laughed that morning stepped forward from the side of the ramp. His eyes didn't move from the jet. He didn't speak. Freya walked past him without pause. She passed the command vehicle. The door was still open. Headset dangling. A clipboard sat on the dash with an unfinished report titled Incident Response, Unidentified Airframe. She didn't touch it. She walked into the hangar instead. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. Her braid hung wet down the back of her flight suit. Her boots left a trail of dust mixed with something darker. No one stopped her. She crossed to the prep bench, sat on the edge, and pulled off the top half of her flight gear. Her undershirt clung to her arms. Her breath was steady. She folded the checklist from her thigh pocket and set it on the bench beside her. For a moment, no one followed. Then someone opened the side door. A mechanic stepped in, looked at her, and nodded without speaking. Behind him, another figure hovered in the hallway. It was the flight ops clerk who had mispronounced her name that morning. She didn't try to say it now. The line she had flown didn't exist in any training manual. No sim had ever covered it. No one had shown her. She'd learned it alone. Now they had seen it. She said nothing, and that was enough. The replay was already on its third loop when the officers arrived. No one had touched the playback controls. The wing cam feed played continuously across the main screen in Copper Dune's flight operations bay, casting a thin blue light across the room. It showed the final approach in silence, no audio, just the silhouette of the Strike Eagle coming down out of haze and crosswind. The rear canopy fogged, the braid unmistakable. "She flew it," someone said quietly, though the voice was almost lost beneath the hum of equipment. Inside the tower's review room, two supervisors stood with folded arms while a technician scrolled through comm logs. He tapped the timestamp, then played the audio from 20 minutes earlier. "This is Raven 2. Backseat. Pilot is unresponsive. I have control." The words hung in the air. No one commented. One officer turned, who cleared her. The tower controller hesitated. She didn't wait to be cleared. Outside, the medical team had already taken Cole to base medbay. He was stable, dehydrated, recovering. The report read, G-force hypoxia onset, followed by secondary blackout. No spinal compression, no long-term effects expected. The footage wasn't about him. Another screen showed the backseat helmet cam from earlier in the flight. Grainy, low angle, distorted by condensation. Freya's face was unreadable. Her braid hung damp beside her collarbone, unmoving as she adjusted flight control manually. Her hands were steady. Her voice, in the clipped recordings, never rose. She spoke only to update status. One of the pilots standing near the door shifted uncomfortably. It was the same one who joked that morning about backseat passengers. He said nothing now. His eyes never left the screen. A technician stepped forward. We tagged the call sign to the rear seat ID, but her registry wasn't logged for primary control. A second officer asked, "Then how did the system respond?" The tech didn't answer. No one had a clear answer. At the back of the room, someone said her name, the right way this time. Freya. The syllables came slowly. No misread vowels. No clipped edges. On the recording, The moment of touchdown replayed again. The aircraft rolled long and low across the strip, dust lifting behind it. A beat later, the canopy cracked open. The rear seat. Freya didn't speak as she climbed out of the jet, boots hitting pavement, soaked flight suit dragging slightly at the seams. She didn't raise her hand, didn't salute. She had simply walked. In the ready room. The lights were dimmed, and the scent of sweat and solvent lingered in the air. Freya stood near the wall, peeling off her gloves finger by finger. Her braid was still wet, strands clinging to her back like silk cords. She didn't look up as people entered. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. She stepped forward, placed the folded checklist on the central table, and stepped back into the shadows. There was no name tag on the sheet. She hadn't written one. The helmet, still marked Freya, rested under her arm. Across the room, the officer from Flight Operations reviewed the data printout, then paused. No assisted landing, no ILS, no stabilization overlay. Rear seat manual input for the final 10 minutes. Someone next to him whispered, "They said backseat doesn't fly." No one responded. Screens in the command wing and at base security showed the same replay. The wing cam, the braid, the back seat. No one had edited the footage. No one needed to. The image was clear enough. A gloved hand on the throttle. The nose of the Strike Eagle aligned by instinct alone. Not with clearance. Not with command. With memory. With control. Another junior pilot approached the ready room door, stopped halfway in, then stepped back again without a word. His eyes met Freya's for only a second. She did not nod. She did not react. He left the hallway. In the silence, someone began updating the operations log. There was no pre-filled form for what had happened. The controller created a new entry. Under primary recovery, he typed her name. Then he paused. He deleted the final letter, corrected the spelling, and typed it again. Freya. She never said what she had done. But they had all seen it, and none of them could look away. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that never raised itself. Freya did not take the controls to prove anything. She flew because the jet needed her to. She landed because no one else could, in a world that overlooked her, mislabeled her, and forgot her name. She remembered every detail, every fault line, every line of code she had studied in silence. And when it mattered most, she didn't wait for permission. She acted with calm, exacting purpose. This was not about recognition. It was about knowing your worth when no one else does. About leading from the second seat and never asking to switch places. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on the quiet strength it takes to keep going when no one sees you. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, consider following for future episodes.